So as you guys may remember, I've been conducting my research on the practice of ability grouping as it is done in schools. So I kind of wanted to start out today with my experience with ability grouping because I feel like I haven't really told you guys about that. So I experienced ability grouping in kind of an informal way. I always took those higher level classes, AP, Advanced, Accelerated, like most of you guys probably did. But my school never really stuck to the whole tracking system where you are designated to those kind of classes. So I was always free to move about, and I think that that was really cool. But I always thought that my experience was really positive. I enjoyed being in a group with other smart kids. I enjoyed having that added stimulation. But as I've been doing my research, I've come to see the other side of the argument, and I've walked away with a very different view of the practice. So first of all, I wanted to tell you guys about the goal of ability grouping overall. So kind of similar to what Nikki was talking about, they wanted to close the achievement gap using ability grouping. So they noticed that there obviously is one between the high achievers and low achievers, and ability grouping was kind of intended to bridge that gap. So I have 3 main points for you guys today. First, ability grouping is a very controversial practice, and there's a reason for it. Second, the practice does not fulfill its intended purpose of closing the achievement gap. And third, I'll introduce you guys to a program called AVID that's pioneering new methods of education, and I really think that the educational system needs to kind of implement these. So a quick overview of the controversy. A lot of people think that ability grouping is a good thing because it would provide appropriate environments for each level of achiever. And then another main argument they have is that it would allow teachers to employ differentiated instruction, and I'll go more in depth into these in a minute. And then on the other side of the argument, you have the idea of social stratification resulting from ability grouping. And then lastly, there's the problem where school officials have very different attitudes and ideas about these different ability groups. So going back into the case in favor of ability grouping, so a lot of people believe that ability grouping provides specific tools for each level of achiever. These range from more stimulation, more support, to things like critical thinking and planning. And then the other main point that I had was that it allows for differentiated instruction. So teachers are free to plan their lesson plans aimed toward a specific group of students. So they can, implement higher cognitively functioning activities, or they can focus more on things that low achievers would get benefits from. So the case against ability grouping is where more of my research has been focused. I think there's a lot more evidence in this area. So first of all, I kind of talked about how officials have very different views of ability groups. So the high achieving groups get all of this praise and resources, whereas the low achieving groups are kind of pushed down and end up in something like this, where the high achievers are constantly reinforced with positive messages, and the low achieving groups are kind of seen as inferior. This can have a very disastrous effect if the students pick up on it. So basically, one of the problems that results is that the higher achievers know that they can move on and go on to bigger and better things, and low achievers are kind of gently guided away from that. And one of the main results is that low achievers are much less likely to go to college. There are several possibilities for why this would happen. One of the main ones that I think is this negative view of them held by school officials. A study that I came across actually found that students in low achieving ability groups are far less likely to go on to college than their high achieving peers. And another possible reason for this would just be there are less of their peers going down this path, so they don't see it as a viable option for themselves. And then there's also the problem where low achieving groups are usually channeled into a vocational track or something like apprenticeship or technical school versus traditional college setting. Another problem with ability grouping is teachers. So many studies have found that high achieving groups are usually taught by very well qualified teachers. And these teachers are really good at engaging their students, finding motivating activities for them, promoting things like critical thinking, cognitive development, all of those sorts of great things that students need. On the other hand, the low achieving groups are taught by bad teachers. They're less qualified, they rely a lot more on workbooks, don't emphasize critical thinking, and they're just not as good at engaging their students overall. So this is another reason why students in different achievement level groups would have a difference in their college going rates. So moving on to my second point is that ability grouping does not fulfill its intended purpose. So when ability grouping first began, a lot of people argued that being in a homogeneous setting with students of similar intellect would allow for increased engagement and participation in classrooms. Kind of like what I was saying at the beginning that I experienced. However, a lot of researchers have found that this isn't the case. In fact, they found that ability grouping has zero effect on achievement levels. So one research piece that I came across was a meta-analysis of 29 different studies from across the board. And what Slavin did was he just kind of compared their methods and their results and came to this conclusion that there's no positive effect and there's even a negative effect on the low achieving groups. So if this is the case, if its intended purpose isn't being met, then why are we continuing with ability grouping? In response to this question, I will introduce you guys to what I think is a very good alternative to ability grouping, a program called AVID. So AVID is a program that targets middle school and high school students. It stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. So AVID's mission statement, as you guys can see, is to close the achievement gap by preparing all students for college readiness and success in a global society. So AVID really isn't focused on one group. It takes in all students. Their formula is simple. They raise expectations of the students in their program, and then with the support that AVID provides, these students rise to and often surpass the challenge. So they aim to make college a reality for students who wouldn't normally have this plan, those students in the ability grouping system that are kept down. AVID does this through a formula of acceleration instead of remediation. So AVID students are put into those high-level classes, those AP classes. Instead of just being given remedial help, they are challenged and they're pushed farther. And AVID has gotten a lot of success with this program. So I want to give you guys some stats about AVID so you can see why I think it's such a good thing to implement. Clearly, the model is easily implemented. As you guys can see, the program now affects 700,000 students in almost 5,000 schools across the United States. That's a huge number. Of the seniors in the program, in the class of 2012, 98% graduated on time with their class, which is a really high graduation rate for any program, and the fact that AVID is doing it by targeting students that would be in low achieving groups makes it even more remarkable. And then of this 98% that graduated, 90% were going on to colleges. In general, 74% of AVID students go on to four-year universities. Not community college, not technical school, four-year colleges. Ability grouping and AVID differ in another way, simply the students that they target. So AVID targets students who are usually ignored by the ability grouping system, those B, C, even D students, and it takes them in. So at the high school level, AVID is an optional elective course. So students go in for one period a day. They learn things like critical thinking, planning, organizing, things that are going to make college more of an attainable goal. So with stats like these, I've really come to think that AVID is a much better alternative to ability grouping. Clearly, they're doing something right. So in conclusion, I think it's definitely time for a change in our educational system. Programs like AVID are blazing the trail with new methods, and we need to follow. Regardless of what the actual solution to our educational problems is, the only way we're going to find it is to abandon outdated practices like ability grouping and experiment with new ways, such as AVID has been doing. Hopefully we can do this, and the future of America really does depend on it. Thank you.